Hi everyone, I'm Jackie and I'm standing in today for Laird. Unfortunately, he's upset since he heard that some of you are donating to your local public radio station, but still are not becoming a patron of AtlantaMusicCritic.com. All you need do is go to patreon.com/AtlantaMusicCritic and pledge any amount to keep AMC cameras rolling. Remember, there are a few places where you can hear in-depth interviews with leaders in Western art music. It will mean that William can give that raise in pay to Laird, which has been promised for so long. Your donation can be the medicine that cures our beloved and esteemed Laird so he can return to his announcer duties. Act now and thanks. Now on to today's conversation. Today, AMC creator William Ford is talking with guitarists Michael Newman and Laura Oltman, otherwise known as the Newman and Oltman Guitar Duo. Their contributions to the world of music have been recognized by grants and awards from the National Endowment for the Arts, Chamber Music America, and other national and international organizations, including the ASCAP Award for Adventurous Programming. The duo has served as Ensemble-in-Residence at New York's Mannes College, the New School of Music, since 1987. They are artistic advisors to the D'Addario Foundation Performance Series at Carnegie Hall and were the Alan and Wendy Pesky Artists in Residence at Lafayette College. Michael and Laura are founders and artistic directors of the New York Guitar Seminar at Mannes, the new Luciano International Guitar Seminar in Italy, and Raritan River Concerts and Raritan River Music Festival. Please join William and these two brilliant guitarists and learn how they came together to make sweet music.
Hey, good to meet you two.
Well, our green screen is pretending that we're in a little house on the Delaware River in New Jersey, so we'll go with that.
That is so convincing. It looks great. It is really good to meet you. I really like to get some backstories on people. I like to find out how they became the successes that they've become. And that means sometimes we've got to go back. So I kind of like to get the backstories. I use the parallel of we can't really understand Lydia Tarr until we understand Lydia Tarr's background, if you've seen the movie.
Yes, I think it was Linda was her original name.
Exactly, which tells you a lot right there.
Man, you remembered that.
Yeah.
We had a lot of details.
So I kind of like to go over where each of you were born, what it was like growing up where you grew up. How was it that you had an inkling that somehow or other music might be for you? And then how did your parents react to that? Also your peer reactions. Okay. And then briefly to talk a little bit about education, because that's easy to find on the internet. And then to talk about you as a professional duo. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Keeping in mind, we only have 40 minutes. So who wants to go first? Again, talking about where you were born. All right. Laura?
I was born in Evanston, Illinois, near Chicago, a suburb of Chicago. But we moved away from Evanston when I was pretty young, like 3, and moved to Phoenix area, Scottsdale, where I was really interested in rodeo and cowboys and guns and the whole Western thing. And then we moved a few places, but I kind of settled in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, that's where I learned to play the guitar. And I took lessons from a person who had escaped from Cuba on one of the freedom flights. That was a major cultural strand of South Florida. Still to this day, it's a huge population of people who were Cuban emigres. And she had studied in Spain with some very important and influential teachers, and she was a very legit classical guitarist. I kind of came into it by accident because I had been playing the guitar only because I bought one for a prop for my rock band with our neighbors. It was a toy electric guitar from the Sears catalog, which I hadn't really intended myself to play. I wasn't the lead guitarist because, girls are not the lead guitarist in a rock band, especially.
Well, now they get.
But back then, forget it. Gordy, my friend, was the lead guitarist, but he didn't have the money to buy it, so I bought it. And our band broke up pretty shortly after it arrived. But I had it, and my mother read the directions and figured out, like, you could tune it and you could play some chords and you could sing some songs. So that I didn't count on playing it, but I did. And so I started kind of teaching myself, as so many people do with guitar, the time-honored way. But she noticed that I was interested and I kept playing. And so she arranged for lessons at a local recreation center. So I learned to read music at least. But that wasn't like classical guitar. And the attraction for me of that was that the guitar is like a piano, really, like more as an instrument, like a piano than anything else. And so it's a solo instrument and you don't have to sing, which I think is not the way you hear it used. Mostly you hear it as an accompaniment to singing. But it certainly has a vast repertoire dating back to the first, printed music of stuff for solo playing and for ensembles. But I wasn't a very good singer, so like playing and singing was a dead end. Being a rock star was not in my future. Not that I even wanted to. I didn't even like rock and roll that much or all that stuff, but it was popular. So I just started classical guitar lessons, and I just thought it was really, really fun to play the guitar in that way where it could be a solo instrument.
Was your mother musically inclined?
Her family was in possession of a piano, which for people like them was, I'm not going to say nobody had pianos. People did, but her parents were born in the 19th century, and I think that was a major status symbol to have a piano in your house. But her sister did become a professional musician. And consequently, that limited my mom's access to the piano, but she was actually really good at it. And she could, when we would visit my grandmother's house like once a year, she could sit down and play. She could read music really easily. And yeah, she probably could have been a decent musician. And she always sang in church choir, always.
But your dad too.
And my dad did. He was more like actively musical in his growing up. He played trombone in big bands in college. He also sang in choir, they all did that. So we were exposed to them being interested in music for sure. And when we were younger, I think the dividing line in culture between like art music and popular music was not that so great.
What did your friends think of you playing the guitar?
Well, everybody played the guitar. So it wasn't, not, I would say it was not something that people really even raised an eyebrow over. And like one of the big hits that I was inspired by was this piece called Classical Gas. And that was a really popular instrumental in the 60s. So like it was acceptable to play like that. It wasn't unusual. It was hard. People didn't know how to do it necessarily, or it was maybe admirable if you could like play the guitar as a solo instrument. But I don't think anybody thought it was a super egghead thing to do or unusual or anything like that.
And also for us growing up in the 60s and 70s, it was still a time when you would see great classical performers on The Tonight Show, on late night talk shows and featured in films. So there was still a very wide cultural dissemination of classical music. Much as Laura said, the divide between pop and or commercial music and art music wasn't quite really what it is today.
Classical Gas was Mason
Williams.
Yes. He was, I recollect he was on the Smothers Brothers a lot.
He was the music director of the Smothers Brothers television show.
All right. And I just read about it. I didn't live through it. I was born much after that. Just kidding. So how about you, Michael? Where were you born?
I was born in the French Hospital in Manhattan, New York. My parents lived in Brooklyn, so I guess I lived in Brooklyn for the first 3 years. My father was from Flatbush. My mother was born in the Bronx, but raised in Jamaica, Queens. So it was very much a New York-centric family. But we left New York for the wilds of New Jersey when I was 3. And then when I was about 7, I started taking piano lessons. I think both Laura and I are quite fortunate that our early experiences with music were with formal instruction and learning to read music.
Mine, eventually. I started out not that way.
But pretty soon.
Pretty soon. Yeah, well, because, yes, our parents recognized that as something that would help us.
Right. And so I started with piano lessons when I was 7. Our piano was in the basement, and I was afraid to go down to the basement by myself to practice. So the piano didn't last too long. But then I started with a local guitar teacher at a music store. And within about a year, he thought that I really had some talent for music. I had learned with him from the Mel Bay method, which is one of the most popular guitar learning methods from the 20th century. From there, he suggested I start with a classical teacher. And I went to a guy named Tom Anthony in Plainfield, New Jersey. And there, instead of just playing melodies or strumming chords, I discovered, as Laura described, the soloistic approach to playing guitar, playing the bass line, playing the melody, the chords, the rhythm, everything all at once. I really enjoyed the complexity of that. And both my parents were musical. They were members of the New York Recorder Society. They had both learned to play piano as kids, growing up in New York. They said that the school system in New York at the time, they grew up in the 1930s, everybody took music. Everybody had instrumental lessons. And so there was a wealth of knowledge in families about music. So I did a lot of practicing, not nearly as much as I was supposed to, but I learned the guitar pretty well. And by the time I was in high school, actually junior high, I would say by 8th grade, I had pretty well decided that that was going to be my life, was as a musician, as a guitarist.
Both of you went on to some kind of university conservatory training?
Mm-hmm. Yes. We both have degrees in applied music. Michael went to Mannes, and I went to Florida State University, which actually was an early adopter of classical guitar as an applied music instrument. Because when we were when we were looking for colleges, there were just even less than a handful, just a hand, half a hand of programs where you could get a bachelor's degree in applied music studying guitar.
Yeah, Mannes School of Music, which was my alma mater, and also where Laura and I have been Ensemble-in-Residence since 1987. And I've been teaching there for 44 years coming up. That was the first college in the United States where you could get a degree in guitar. I think 1956 is when they started the program. So for the two of us beginning college in the early 70s, it was still on the cutting edge of that kind of formal training. I think in Europe and South America, it had been more advanced for hundreds of years. But in the US, that was really the blossoming of formal guitar studies.
Well, you say in Europe and Latin America, I'm not so sure about whether you could go to a conservatory or a university and get a degree in
a degree in performance in guitar.
Performance.
That could be.
I think it was kind of fringy even then.
Mm-hmm. So we both did our undergraduate work at those schools, but we also studied in the summers at the Aspen Music Festival, which at the time was the only place in the US during the summer where you could get an advanced program in guitar studies for a summer course. There was also one in Banff in Alberta, but Aspen was the place. And our teacher there, Oscar Gilia, was a disciple of Andres Segovia. So it was coming from a long tradition of fine classical training. And so we spent all our summers during college in Aspen working with Gilia. And also, well, that's kind of where we got to know each other pretty well and got together then.
How did you decide that you wanted to be a duo?
Well, there's probably a few different answers to that, but there is a tradition, you know, of guitar duo and music played for two guitars and written for two guitars. It's not nearly as big as the solo guitar tradition, but it does exist. And there have been, like when we were growing up, there had been some duos making recordings. So there was like several as, you know, models and who had made particularly arrangements for guitar duo. They sounded pretty good. But I would also say my teacher preferred the idea that I played with another person than solo. This got a little funny, but it was a cultural thing. But, you know, she was born in Cuba and she kind of believed that it was not appropriate for a woman to have a career on her own.
Times have changed.
Especially like as a performer, it was a little unseemly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure she wasn't the only one, because there have been not that many, especially then. So like women who had careers as guitarists, which was like this many, were usually connected with a man. She thought that was the right way to do it. So she had another student he was a good bit older than me, Phil Sanzone. And we used to play together. So I learned all this music. So I was doing it already before I met Michael, and I knew a lot of music. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I didn't resent it. But now looking back on that whole idea, I was pretty young, and in high school when I was doing things with Phil, and she wasn't totally wrong that, you know, it would be useful to have somebody with you. That would be true if you were a man or a woman, to have kind of guide you through all this stuff. But still, nevertheless, yes, that was a little bit sexist. She thought it was particularly true for women, that they should not be unchaperoned in the wider world.
Yeah, my experience was probably different in that regard. But I had started performing professionally when I was still in high school as a soloist. My teacher at Manus, and even before that, Alberto Valdez Blaine, he was also a Cuban immigrant, but from the 1930s, he came over with his family. And he and his brother were the first guitar duo to play at Carnegie Recital Hall in 1941. So he knew all of the duo literature available at the time. And I was interested in that. And I played in a lot of ensembles when I was in college. So I liked the idea of chamber music, of that camaraderie, working with others. And then when Laura and I met and got together, it was a great excuse for me to go down to Tallahassee to visit with her. Oh, got to come down. We've got a gig, or to get her to come up to New York. So we were able to get a lot of performing opportunities so that we could spend more time together. And then as we did that more and more, we just gravitated toward it. We were still doing some solo performing through the years, but really the focus has been with the duo, and then also with duo with singers, duo with other instrumentalists, and duo concertos. So a lot of the commissioning work that we've done has been for our duo plus others.
I don't mean to be stereotypic, but let me be stereotypic a minute. I think that in my thinking about it, it would seem to me that most of the guitar literature out of Europe would have been from the warmer countries, like Spain and Italy. But as you head north, there's less of a repertoire.
I think the best music written a long time ago, a lot of it is from Northern Europe. So famous.
But you're talking about like 500 years ago, like
but
really
I mean,
long
this
time.
is foundational because the lute was, well, okay, so the lute is an oud, which is a Middle Eastern instrument. It was brought by the Moors into Spain in like 711 AD. And it was widely adopted in Europe. But it starts in Spain for sure, and that is a Southern European country. I think it was also widely adopted in Italy. But even as early as the mid 1500s, John Dowland was writing for the lute in England. Gotcha. And he wrote some of the greatest, like some of the greatest English music. And he was a lutenist, and he just wrote for the lute and sometimes for two. There was also, of course, J.S. Bach wrote a bunch of things for the lute. Not as much as, for other instruments, obviously, but he left a nice chunk of stuff. And there was Silvius Weiss, who was a contemporary of his, who wrote lots of lute music that's really, really very good. So, and I mean, you can go, there's a lot of people, especially English people. And I think in some ways, the lute was easier to play in Northern Europe than in Spain. One interesting theory of the development of guitar is, the shape of the guitar is distinctive compared to the lute. Why did it change? And Ferdinand and Isabella consolidated their kingdoms in 1492, and one of the things they dearly wished to do was expel the Moors.
And the Jews. And
yes, and a lot of other people too. The lute was a Moorish instrument in Spain. Right. And so, the vihuela was suddenly invented or suddenly gained currency around the time that Ferdinand and Isabella started throwing people out. It could be thought of maybe as a Christianized version of the lute, that it was acceptable for people who were on the side of Ferdinand and Isabella, didn't want to be thought of as the wrong kind of people if they would play that instrument. That is kind of the early guitar.
And that perspective that you're talking about is really what grows from that. So Spain, Portugal are where the guitar-shaped instrument really started to develop. And where were those people going after 1492? All throughout the Americas. So you're absolutely right that the entirety of South America became populated with these guitar type instruments, smaller ones, especially because a lot of them were little at the time in the 1500s. The ukulele is very much coming from the tradition of the Spanish and Portuguese guitars of the 1500s, charango, cavaquinho in South America. So really that heritage coming from the Iberian Peninsula really took off as the conquistadors brought their culture with them to the New World.
Question for both of you. Do you listen to music yourselves, setting aside what you play, but in the car, do you listen to music? At home, do you listen to music? And if so, what kind?
Well, it's getting harder to listen to music because you can't use CDs anymore because all the devices are lacking CD drives. Like the car used to be, we would listen a lot in the car.
We would listen to cassettes in the car.
Because you could just put them in the car and listen. It was really easy. Now our car no longer has the CD player. And I don't like all this cloud stuff. And all these companies you have to deal with to download music. And I mean, we could play with our phones, but we don't. So I like to look stuff up. If I want to hear something, I'll sometimes listen on YouTube. Of course, it's full of commercials, which is a drag. But I'm going to say, no, we don't listen as much because to me, to old people like us, it's gotten actually harder.
You know what I think is an interesting viewpoint on listening to music casually is that there was a long period of time where the quality of the sound was really important. Just the whole idea of being able to record music only goes back to the very beginning of the 1900s. So it hasn't been that long. And the advances in quality through wax cylinders to 78 RPMs, then the long playing records, then the advent of tape. And each time there's a new technology, the sound quality improves more and more. Our first records were direct to disc LPs that had super high audiophile fidelity. And this is even before digital. So people were spending thousands and thousands of dollars on speakers, on turntables, on gold wires, silver wires to connect all their components. So people really cared a lot about it. And now, pretty much everybody's listening to music like this. At best, they're using earbuds. But the quality, even though the recordings are fine, what you're hearing is certainly not audiophile quality. So I think that's been a really big change in the last couple of decades, for sure. So
I'm a person who has spent thousands in their life on speakers and turntables, Macintosh equipment, and I have a big stereo setup, surround sound in my living room, but I don't listen to it.
Really?
Yeah, because I'm sitting at my computer most of the day and I'm listening to YouTube or a streamed channel. So I get what you're saying. It's about portability. It's not about quality. At least if it's about quality, it's a very small range of quality.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's fair to say that people whose livelihoods or whose lives revolve around music can listen through that quality gap a little bit. Like if I'm listening to a symphony orchestra on the computer speakers, I know what that piece is going to sound like in a big concert hall with a really great orchestra and fantastic acoustics. And of course, that's the best experience of it. But what we're listening for, and you know, you're listening to music constantly as well, you're listening more about the composition itself, about the process, the structure of it, the harmonies, the orchestrations. So you can get a lot out of it, even with mediocre quality.
That's true. We use our brains to fill in the blanks when we need to. Yes. So I think you're absolutely right.
But like talking about recordings, I mean, they're full of hiss and clicks and pops, and like you would have a whole set of records to play one lousy piece. You know, My dad, he had these old 78s. I used to listen to his New World Symphony. You had to get up every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Put on another record and then turn them all over, and they sounded really bad. But I still really liked that piece of music. I was willing to sit through and listen to it because that was the only version of it that I had.
That's right. The other option is you could only hear the music when an orchestra was coming to town, or your local orchestra, if you had one, was playing that piece.
Well, and it used to be really in the past, I mean, where guitar had its great heyday in the early 19th century, you had to play stuff at home.
Right.
So, you know, there's all these piano arrangements of stuff and guitar arrangements of stuff, because like guitar was the CD player of 18.
Yes. Talk about your CD.
Okay.
Well, yes. So we have returned to the CD recording world, but our latest one also came out as an audiophile LP. And of course, digital download and everything else.
Which I'm going to say, just to interrupt you, which means it's only as long as an LP. The CD is also only the length of an LP because it was intended first as an LP and as a CD. So it's like 15 minutes aside.
And this was released by Music Masters, which was an offshoot of Musical Heritage Society from back in the 60s and 70s.
Yes.
If you didn't
White
send
covers.
That's right. If you didn't send your postcard back, you got the featured selection and had to pay for it.
That's right.
And so we had done some recording for them over the years. This is their new revised company. And this recording is all music by Leo Brouwer, the great Cuban guitarist, conductor, and of course, composer. And he had his 80th birthday in 2019. And we were able to commission him to write a new duet for us. And we thought it was going to be maybe 6-7 minutes long. And we got 41 pages of manuscript that came from Cuba, from Havana. And it was, it's a 4-movement, 17-minute piece. So it's really a great addition to the duo repertory. And since then, we've had Brouwer write 2 additional pieces that we've been doing. Did you want to say more about?
What was the title of the piece that he wrote for you?
It is called The Book of Imaginary Beings, and it's inspired by a book by Jorge Luis Borges, who's an Argentine writer, and who was one of the great writers in the Spanish language. And he had a book that has several different editions. That's a kind of like a little encyclopedia of mythological beings. And it's about beings from all over the world. Brouwer chose, I'm going to say, relatively famous beings, like from Greek mythology, Greek and Roman mythology mainly, that are known like widely in like Western European culture. So like unicorn, minotaur, Gorgon.
Unicorn.
Yeah, so those are the ones that he chose, mainly those more familiar ones, I suppose. Then people have an easier time figuring out what the source material is like. But I thought what was kind of interesting about his idea was that he's a Latin American composer, and like this piece has absolutely zero to do with like Latin America per se.
Yeah, it's not like all folkloric rhythms and that kind of thing. It's really quite wide-ranging in its tonal language, in its rhythmic complexity. But Brouwer has been a great composer, renowned not only for his guitar music, but a lot of what he does symphonically. He's written a lot of film scores. There was one, Like Water for Chocolate, that film that came out some years ago. That's Brouwer's music. So it's really quite fascinating to hear what he's done more recently now that he's an older guy with his writing for guitar ensemble.
I was going to add one more thing on the source material. Like the author of the book is also Latin American, and he sounds like a totally Latin American product about something not Latin American at all.
Well, Brouwer told us once when he was writing film scores, he said he always teaches people, don't write music that sounds like, he called it Mickey Mouse music, nothing wrong with Mickey Mouse, but he said, don't write music where if somebody's walking up the stairs, the music goes dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum, and when they come down the stairs, dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum. So he's evoking ideas about the unicorn, the minotaur, the Gorgon.
Like he's like saying, he's about the reaction you might have to this, not any specific appearance. Or one thing Brouwer is great at is writing for the guitar. So like I think that's why people listen so much to his guitar music. He gets really creative in getting sound out of the guitar, which, it has a lot of capabilities as an instrument that are different from, say, for example, the piano, which is kind of a big machine that has a uniform quality of sound. The guitar has a lot of different sounds it can make, and he really exploits that in most of his music. But he does it I think he does it really expressively and not just like, let's see how many sounds we can make this thing do. There's always a good reason for what he's doing that makes the piece more expressive. And he's one of the best people at writing for the guitar.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of sound clips of the record on our website.
Yes.
But we're also going to be performing a lot of these pieces coming up at the New York Guitar Seminar at Manus, at Raritan River Music Festival, at the Grand Canyon Music Festival, Lanciano Guitar Seminar in Italy. So we're trying to get the music out as much as we can.
Thank you very much. Sorry to have to rush it.
Yeah, it's been a great pleasure to speak with you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Hey,
Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks to William, Michael, and Laura for that brilliant conversation. I especially enjoyed hearing some of the history of the guitar. And thank you for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications below. If there is someone you would like William to interview, leave your suggestion in the comments section. Let us know what you like about this channel and any changes you would like to see. Please become a patron at any level. Even just a few dollars a month will help AMC to continue to grow and improve. Scan this QR code with your phone for direct access to www.patreon.com/AtlantaMusicCritic. If you would like more information about today's guest, go here. This is Jackie. Thanks again for watching Atlanta Music Critic. See you again soon with another in-depth interview about leaders in the classical music world.